What we saw in our last session was that John was inviting people to cross the Jordan, to go through the waters as a symbolic step into a new identity with God. And what we saw from when you look at the Gospels together, we see that the invitation is given, and the whole of the nation of Israel are responding. And as we'll see, it's not just them, but we see people from all walks of life, and even Romans coming in that sense of commitment. And then we get this curious statement that in Luke 3 and verse 7, it says, "But as the people came for baptism, John turns around and calls them, 'You brood of snakes.'" There's almost like this angry insult that he gives to people. And it seems a bit harsh, doesn't it, when you read Luke's account that people are coming for repentance and he calls them a brood of snakes. Well, what you have to do is cross-reference. And if you look at Matthew's account, in Matthew 3 and verse 7, what we see is that it's actually the Pharisees and the Sadducees, these religious people who are coming along and watching what John's doing. They're the ones that John calls a brood of snakes. And I want us to take a couple of days, couple of sessions to just unpack this a little bit more. Because when we read through the Gospels, we often come up against the Pharisees and the Sadducees. When we look at the life of Jesus, we often see that it's the Pharisees and the Sadducees are the ones that are opposing Jesus. And what's all that about? Well, first of all, let's think of the Pharisees. And the Pharisees are actually, they're not, if you like, a signed-up card-carrying club. It's not easy to say, oh, I'm a Pharisee and here's my membership card. They're a bit more sort of loose in terms of their definition. It's more of I suppose, a group of people who have a common set of values. And there are four things to note about the Pharisees. The first one is that they are a religious sect. And they're a religious sect who believed in what's called the oral tradition and the written tradition. They placed an equal authority in the eyes of God between the oral traditions, the things that had been passed down, and the written law that was written down. So up to this point, when I say the oral tradition hadn't been written down, and it's not until a couple of hundred years later that it begins to get codified. But what we see is that, first of all, when Moses went up the mountain and was given the law on Mount Sinai by God, that's what we call the written law. And that's what led to what's called the Jewish Torah. It's a set of, if you like, the legal constitution that God has given to his people. But what the Pharisees held was that God also gave to Moses an oral interpretation of those traditions. He gave to Moses the ability to interpret the written law. And from that came this oral tradition that was passed down from generation to generation that set out, in addition to the written law, a set of oral traditions of how and what it meant to follow God. And as I said, a couple of hundred years after John, we see that that's actually codified into what's now called the Talmud. So they are a religious sect, but they're a religious sect that placed equal importance, equal value, equal authority on the oral traditions and the written word. They were a group of people who believed in the afterlife. They believed that God punished the wicked, he rewarded the righteous, and they believed the Messiah was coming. So with their belief, they believed in something of the supernatural nature of God. But they were also a political group. Not only were they a religious group with their own theology, they were a political group who attempted to influence government leaders. They would seek to work through politics to achieve their own agenda. And their agenda was pretty much tied in with a sense of national identity, of what it meant to be the nation of Israel, to be the Jews. And as a result of that, they were closely linked to the Herodians, or the Herods, because they sought the political influence in order to achieve their theological aims.